I come from Zimbabwe, and I was working as a teacher, a primary school teacher. The problem started in 2002 when I was helping the women in the community with the self-help projects. So we were making jam out of lemon and selling that as a cash generating project. But then it was through a very small political party which was called the Liberty Party, of which it was a ZANU-PF opposition anyway, although it was small. So I was approached and threatened. I was taken to the police station. I was interviewed, I was beaten, but obviously I couldn't go to hospital because you are warned never to go to hospital because you have to explain what happened to you. So if it's anything to do with the government, you just make matters worse. And then at the same time, I was studying with the Zimbabwe Open University. So we would go to the school on weekends with other people I was studying with because I had the venue for our meetings and discussions. So after that, that's when the problems got worse because they thought it was a political meeting as well and that we were, plotting against the government. It got to a point where I was even visited at home at night. So I just left the country without any preparation or anything.
When I came into this country, I came with the intention of helping my brother with the kids because they were saying the child care was too much for them. Unfortunately, their marriage disintegrated and I had to make my own way. I found myself in Essex, applied for a job and worked my way up. But when I came here, I educated myself and was working in a neurological center. Unfortunately, I was arrested for working and went to prison, served my sentence and became homeless and destitute.
Asylum in Britain has always been an ex gratia act. What that means is that it's granted at the discretion of the Home Office and of the government. Unfortunately, what that also means is that it's very susceptible to the whims of the holder of that office, the government of the day. But the fact that asylum can be granted reinforces the image that Britain is a liberal country. It implies that Britain is prepared to underwrite the costs of asylum, of taking in asylum seekers for the sake of its liberal values. So what this means in actual fact is that the asylum seeker or asylum seekers generally are perceived to be as a burden that have to be tolerated by the country for the sake of liberal values, rather than people who are coming here because they've been persecuted in their countries of origin.
There are people who are worried about immigration, there are people who are worried about issues which might be related to new migrants in that area, but we want people to think about, is that really an issue of immigration? Is it something broader? Is it to do with different structures of power? Is it to do with employment? Is it to do with education? Is it something else about investment in the local area? So I'd really want, in general, this isn't coming out of the research yet, but just want people to look at different perspectives and ask questions more than they might necessarily do, particularly of the kind of broader media debate, which is often one-sided.
People are not here by choice. People are here because of persecution risk at home, either on the Geneva Convention or out of the Geneva Convention. These are still persecution-related risks. For example, if they were involved in politics, it's covered by the Geneva Convention. If they were persecuted because of their member of ethnic minority group, or because of their appartenance to political any political things, group, or because of their gender, of sexual orientation and so on. These are things covered under the Geneva Convention. But imagine somebody, would they call it land first, because of family heritage, they own a land, but because of conflicts that happens as well within families, someone is targeted by a group within the community. And the police would not do anything to protect that person from being persecuted by the members of his community. It is amount to persecution. But the problem is how to prove that the authorities of that country would not lift a single finger to protect him. And if not, it's not covered by the Geneva Convention. There are also forced marriage. They said it's family issues. You can relocate somewhere else in your country.
Women are affected in many ways within the asylum process compared with men. More often than not, women come to this country not as primary asylum claimants. In other words, they come as dependents of primary claimants. So the dependents, generally speaking, of a male relative, and very often that's the spouse, although it can also be another male relative, the father or an uncle or whatever it is. But the situation of not being a primary claimant means that women are often put in a very vulnerable position.
Life in Zimbabwe is quite hard, and I was prostituting on the streets. I don't know who told my brother, and that's when he decided to buy the ticket for me to come here and instead look after the kids. So when I came here, I just thought I cannot be their dependent anymore. I have to fend for myself. So I had to do some courses for care work, and I managed to do that and bettered my life instead of prostituting.
I recently done some research on women seeking asylum and how they survive with destitution, and it was discussed in one of the focus groups by women as something some people do to survive.
Well, prostitution's not at the extent or that prostitution that one doesn't match the definitions of profit prostitution really in terms of doing it to getting money like a job. This is means of survival. We need to be really clear about that. It's not about a choice, going to prostitute because you want luxury stuff and so on. It's a way surviving.
Doing things for other people for very little in exchange. Not even money, but let's say clothing. Okay, do you want the trainers or do you want the jacket? Like winter is coming, can you do this and that for me? Then you can have it. So that's exploitation, even by your own people, of which if you have to survive, you just need to do it.
The system tends to encourage people to have children because social services can't help people, but if you've got a child, you will get support because there's no way that a child can be homeless. And also, within the asylum system, if you have a British child, you tend to be recognised and get the right to remain, which isn't very helpful because, okay, some women are in relationships they don't want and will get pregnant as a result of that. Some women are in relationships they do want and get pregnant, but if you're getting pregnant to have a status baby, it's quite uncomfortable. And it was, when we discussed it in the group, it was really uncomfortable because there was people there that had children and there was women there going, you know, we don't want to get pregnant but we feel we're being pushed into it.
You would find women just throwing themselves into meaningless relationships, so they would end up having a baby so that they have accommodation, because if you have a child, surely you are given accommodation, which is not fair really, because that's bringing a human being into this world when you haven't planned it, when you're not even in love.
Women are, compared to men, the most vulnerable gender, and then that vulnerability being made acute by the precarity of their immigration status. They tend to be abused by accommodation providers when they are evicted by the government, for example. Then when they find themselves on the street, they become more vulnerable.
Women might arrive in the UK with a male relative, and if that person, that male relative, is given refugee status, then they get refugee status. But as I said, they're in a very vulnerable position because, for example, let's say that the man, after getting refugee status, decides to abandon the woman or divorce her or whatever. It then means that she's left high and dry, she's left in a situation of illegality because the refugee status wasn't given to her as the primary claimant. She's dependent on a primary claimant. Women very often suffer domestic violence or abuse at the hands of this male relative that is the primary claimant. It's very difficult for women, regardless of who they are and where they are, of dealing with domestic abuse and violence. But for women asylum seekers, it's even more difficult because, you know, what are they supposed to do? If they go to the police to report that person, the husband for instance, or if they leave that person, again, what happens is that they're putting that person on whom they're dependent for their refugee status at risk, and therefore they're putting themselves at risk in another way. So very often women asylum seekers, refugees who suffer domestic violence, abuse, tend not to speak out about that because of their immigration status.
The disbelief and lack of understanding is really apparent because sometimes we get calls from the police and actually they have noticed what's happening and they're phoning you up trying to get people help. So, you know, maybe it's training or understanding that needs to be worked on.
I'm glad you mentioned that you have the key word, disbelief. There is a culture of disbelief. They don't really have any sense of awareness of the reality that people just live every single day.
There is this culture of disbelief in the Home Office, and it stems from the culture of disbelief that exists in society, that's prevalent in society generally, because there is a belief that asylum seekers equals bogus asylum seekers or benefit tourists or whatever, that people are coming to this country simply because they want to access benefits and so on and so forth. So there is this culture of belief which seeps into the Home Office.
It is a political issue that we're researching, and it's a very emotive issue, and that's part of what we're researching is the emotions and the feelings, and as well as include feelings like anger and rage, as well as sadness and fear, and we want to explore how that works, how things like the go home ban or public anti-immigration or anti-illegal immigration campaigning affects people who are scared of it, also affects people who are scared of immigration and want that to be controlled, affects people who might not have thought about it before, and whether it arouses feelings in them. And this is an area of policy which isn't something that's simply rational, and in fact a lot of politicians on all sides of the debate are now saying that it can't be something that's talked about. They're almost rejecting any kind of discussion about economics or as divorced from what people really feel.
When people are put into immigration removal centres or detention centres, it's again the Home Office has recognised in principle, and you know it's also contained in international guidelines and European guidelines, that women who have suffered persecution which has entailed physical violence should not be put in detention centres or immigration removal centres at all. They should be found alternative accommodation, you know, women-only safe spaces, for instance. But in reality, those guidelines are not followed. Very recently, Women for Refugee Women did some research, and the findings of that research came out in a report, I think, in January this year, 2014, which says that Britain's record is really shameful in terms of providing accommodation services for women who've suffered gender-based violence and persecution.
So I've done 2 focus groups with different groups of migrants in Bradford. One was with Roma people. The other group was with refugees and asylum seekers, or people who've been through that system mainly. who were from all different countries, but and were much more, and that was conducted in English, and people were critical, and that was not difficult for me because of critiques of Britain, but difficult because of some of the harrowing stories that they told about their lives and what they've been through to come to Britain and then be told to go home, and talking about, well, where is my home? How can I go home if these things happen to my family, these things happen to me?
I was a married woman, or I am still legally. I left a husband and children. They are no longer children now. I've got 2 adults. I left the boy at 14, who is now a young man of 26. I left a little girl of 6, who is now a young woman of 18. I've lost that time. The ties that were supposed to be there are no longer there. So coming to this country meant that my husband had to wait. I do understand to a certain extent, but he's moved on. He couldn't wait for longer than 12 years. So I'm told that he has moved on. He's in a new relationship. So you have to understand my culture. That if I were to go back to Zimbabwe to say, okay, maybe the political situation has died down, but it's the stigma, according to my culture, that's associated with a woman my age who is not married or whose marriage has broken down. It's as if you've done something wrong. So those are some of the reasons that are making it even harder for me to go back home.
I only came to better my life and help my brothers. Unfortunately, it didn't go the way we had planned it, and I ended up working so as to help my family, my child, mostly because his father passed away and I'm the only one whom he relies on. That's why I had to find some job and work for myself and not get the benefits and not rely on anyone else. I just need to look after my boy.
Where is your boy now?
He's in Africa. I don't even know where he is. I don't even know where he is. Maybe he's in South Africa. I don't know. Nobody knows where he is. He just ran away from home.
I'm 40-something now. I have to be thinking about my retirement plan, but I haven't got no job. I haven't got no money. I'm not in a relationship, and it's like too late. Where do I start from? How do I begin? But if I had a job, I would start from somewhere, you know, do something for myself. Even if it's not maybe working for somebody else, but work for myself.
I can clean the dishes in a restaurant. I can help that restaurant. I can be a housemaid. There are many jobs I can do to help the economy as well. Give something back to the community. If they just could reconsider our situation, it's not that we are here for benefits, but we are willing to learn new skills and better ourselves and help as well